this means is these are support networks. You can drill down into an area, get your claws into that area, deliver for local people, become your local councillor, maybe easing parking charges, doing things that matter to local people, filling the potholes, doing better than the last lot who came in. And that's why it matters. And I think also, just briefly looking at Runcorn, feels like a lifetime ago, but Runcorn is interesting because how many times have Reform UK or one of Farage's previous parties got near to beating the incumbent and never quite sealed the deal? And they have done in Runcorn a big cut through there, because they have a problem with data. They're good at the air war, they're good at social media, they don't know where voters live. That's what the legacy parties do. Now also Reform UK have the same skills.
6 votes. There'll be a lot of fingers gnawed to the bone, no doubt, in Reform HQ. Chris Hope, thank you. Stick with us. Let's bring in the voice now of somebody from the political left, and I'm joined, delighted to say, by the spokesperson for Momentum in the studio, Martin Abrams. Martin, welcome to the studio. Pleasure to have your company. You posted something fascinating on social media earlier on, and that is your understanding of why you believe the Labour Party have done so badly, because they're trying to act like Nigel Farage.
Well, in many respects, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have tried to out-reform, and particularly in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, where the candidate, put out a petition to, to shut down the local asylum seeker hotel, as she described it. If people want to pander to that kind of sentiment, generally voters will vote for the party that already exists. Reform already exists. So, Labour need to be standing up for Labour Party values. And they need, in my opinion, they need to go back to basics and look at things that are popular in this country, like public ownership of public services, standing up for the vulnerable and, reducing inequality. One of the first things that Keir Starmer did when he became Prime Minister was scrap the winter fuel allowance. And I'm a local councillor.
Martin, I need to interrupt you, I'm afraid, because we can now cross to Doncaster, where the local council election results are being announced.
William Brooke, Reform UK, 1,577. Taylor, Terry, the Conservative Party candidate, 291. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows: want of an official mark, 0. Voting for more candidates than the voter was entitled to, 0. Writing or a mark by which the voter could be identified, 0. Being unmarked or wholly void for uncertainty, 10. Rejected in part, a total number of rejected votes of 10. The electorate was 11,942. The turnout was 30.55%. And I do hereby declare that Jason Vernon Charity, Rachel Ann Reid, William Brooke Shaw are duly elected. Congratulations.
Okay, that was just one of the wards there in Doncaster Council. We're expecting multiple wards, of course, across the town to come in. That was just one of them. Chris Hope's going to do a bit of delving into the data. Meanwhile, let's get back to our previous guest that we had there, Martin Abrams. Martin, you were saying some people will be scratching their heads at the notion that Sir Keir Starmer, you would claim, is behaving like Nigel Farage. A lot of people wish he would. Control the borders, protect the British working classes, stick up for patriots, make life more affordable. That isn't what Keir Starmer is doing, and that's why Labour lost.
Well, in many respects, they have been pandering to that sentiment, but I think it also goes back to the fact that they are often attacking some of the most vulnerable in society. So the first act that Keir Starmer did was pretty much scrap the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, and then allow that debate to carry on over the summer without any other news in the headlines. And then he's now cutting personal independence payments for some of the most disabled people in the country. And that gives a kind of sense that Labour is not standing up for the most vulnerable in society. And there's palpable anger out there, Martin. I've spoke to people on the doorstep a lot, and there is palpable anger out there at the moment. The trust in politicians is at an all-time low. If a political party is going to come in and be elected, on a manifesto of change, that was the buzzword that we heard all along, change, 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 and then, revert back to what is essentially Tory austerity that we've just had 14 years of,
Right, Martin,
that has decimated our public services.
I think now we're getting somewhere. I don't think that the Labour Party are copying reform at all, but I do think there are whiffs of that George Osborne austerity. And certainly, you're absolutely right, that we were hearing out on the ground in Runcorn, Labour voters were astonished that Keir Starmer turned his guns on pensioners. They were astonished that they were cutting disability benefits. Why did they do that? It seems completely un-Labour.
It is inexplicable. I do not have any understanding or reason for why they did that. You know, it's not even going to save that much money in the long run. I think they were trying to look like a government that could take decisions, take the tough decisions. But, cutting winter fuel allowance for pensioners, cutting payments for the most disabled people in our society is not a tough decision, OK? A tough decision would be implementing something like a wealth tax, targeting the richest in society and reducing inequality. Because you know what? That would get a lot of kickback. That would get a lot of pressure from, the establishment here, establishment media. That would be a tough decision. Cutting winter fuel allowance is an easy decision and, what I would argue would be a cowardly decision. And, today, I think these results today show that this is actually the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer's premiership. Less than a year into his premiership, there's going to be a lot of MPs that are going to be looking over their shoulders. I think it was 97 MPs in the last general election that were elected with reform in second place. They're going to be looking over their shoulders because they're going to want to preserve their careers and they're going to want the Labour Party to pull something out of the bag and come up with something that will basically put a bit of clear water between Labour and reform. And at the moment, they're not doing anything. Labour need to go back to what Labour stands for.
All right.
Public ownership of public services, reducing inequality. Let's have a wealth tax. Let's basically pay for public services, our crumbling public services with the richest in society.
Martin.
A 2% tax on the richest billionaires in this country would generate about 24 billion.
Martin Abrams, I don't know what you're drinking. I'll have a pint of it. Well put. Superb stuff. Great to have in the studio. Please come back.
Thank you.
Fantastic guest. Martin Abrams, spokesperson for Momentum. Now, we just had those results come in from Doncaster. Have we now got our next guest? No, we are now going to a short break because coming up, we'll be crossing back to Hull as GB News has been speaking to the newly elected mayor. The former